Have you ever wondered why Cormac McCarthy writes such dark novels? Well, in a moment, Cormac McCarthy is going to tell us why. And this is the only time I have ever found where Cormac has gone on the record about his approach to writing novels that err on the more dark side. And this is such a big question you always see in, the McCarthy community on Reddit. People are like, what is wrong with this guy? Or is there any happy content? And in early McCarthy scholarship, a lot of people, labeled him as a nihilist, and that's really not as popular anymore. But if you didn't dive deeper into his work, you could see that most of it has this very dark tone to it. So once we are done with the clip, we're going to have a short discussion on McCarthy's thoughts. Then we are going to ask the question, can you write successful literature that isn't dark? And then last but not least, apply a psychoanalytic lens to McCarthy and to ourselves and ask the question, why do we like to write dark novels? So if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is slowly budding into a Cormac McCarthy headquarters of sorts on YouTube. Over the next couple months, I have so many series, interviews, book breakdowns, and miscellaneous videos on McCarthy plan that it even intimidates me. So if you guys are interested, obviously subscribe to the channel. I have a Cormac McCarthy newsletter that I send out where I share ideas that I create or I come across from McCarthy scholars. So let's waste no further time and hear from Cormac himself.
As far as painting the world as grim, I don't know. If you look at classical literature, the core of literature is the idea of tragedy, and that's you don't really learn much from the good things that happen to you. But tragedy is at the core of human experience, and it's what we have to deal with. That's what makes life difficult, and that's what we want to know about. It's what we want to know how to deal with it. It's unavoidable. There's nothing you can do to forestall it. So how do you deal with it? And all classical literature has to do with things that happen to people they would really rather hadn't.
Mm-hmm. So Cormac does such a great job at creating tragic literature because he contrasts some of his, tragic or idealistic characters with this new technological society that has unlimited dark potentiality. In The Orchard Keeper, we see the obliteration of a whole community in just a couple decades. And even though we don't see that, that's what's going on. That's what's driving some of the characters into extreme action. In No Country for Old Men, the sheriff cannot keep up with or handle this new evil world. Most recently in The Passenger, Bobby and Alicia Western seemingly are thrown into disarray rather than clarity by their genius ability in mathematics and science, and then obviously their father. And in each one of McCarthy's novels, tragedies are occurring that you may not even see, but establish kind of the tone of the novel. And I think that's why McCarthy is such a beautiful author, because when you place a character that's rooted in nature with this new world, problems start to occur. And in American history, this is very exemplified with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, when we have this genius type figure that cannot handle the real world, but then moves back out into nature. Problems start to occur. And with a lot of McCarthy's characters, they are moving in and out of nature, in and out of narratives that slowly but surely start to darken the novel. Every single time Billy crosses over into Mexico in The Crossing, things start to get darker and darker. First he loses the wolf, then he comes back and loses his parents, then he goes back and loses Boyd. Then when he goes back and gets Boyd's bones back, he's turned into a character that's killing people and is almost a maniac. And then at the end with The Last Crossing, we see someone who, at the start who started this chain of events with wanting to help nature, help the wolf, help take it away from the technological society, and now he won't even help a dog, and he cries and weeps into the night. So do you guys think that you can write novels that are successful that aren't totally negative? Because if we look at a list of the top 100 novels of all time, most of them are going to be tragic. Maybe a couple might be neutral, but there are so what do you guys think? Can you write very successful, positive novels? Because I only know one person who does this, and it's probably because he's at some level a slight bit of a troll. And that is another one of the greatest living American authors, and that is Tom Robbins. His book, Jitterbug Perfume and Still Life with Woodpecker, are genius in the sense that they are beautiful novels that almost have no tragic elements to them. He, in his opinion, he was like, why would I create these artiste manqué, suffering artist type figures when that's not how my reality works? I live a very positive and elevated reality, mostly through meditation and psychedelics. So I'm going to exemplify that through my works. And that is a much harder task, I think. And once again, let me know down below, because there's this, if you believe that authors kind of pull from this creative ether, there's so much negative energy in that ether that you can pull from. But in terms of the positive side, you almost have to create that all yourself. You have to create that reality. And, we're getting a little meta here, but obviously McCarthy is a very well-read individual. He knows how stories and myths work, and that he applies that to his novels in general. And another powerful thing that he does is that when you base a story in nature, when you are a novel writer who is at some level an eco-novelist, just because of all the natural elements that you put into your prose, most of the time it actually errs on the negative. And you think like, why? Because right now, if you and I came out to my house and we went to the desert and we watched the sunset, it would be a very fun experience. It's pretty most ecstatic and positive most of the time. But when you start to spend a lot of time out in nature, it's actually a very mellowing and a very kind of neutral, if not slightly dark experience, because you start to see how reality actually works. You get rid of all the simulacra and all the frames and all the stuff that society puts around us. Right now I'm looking at another house outside my window. There's so much reinforcement happening. And when you start to remove that, then you start to process human reality. And at some level, we want to maybe transition into some psychoanalytic thought. We are, at our core, very fragmented and traumatized individuals. And before we get into that, if you're writing a novel out in, about with all these natural elements, I think as it expands, as you start to expand nature and expand that feeling, I don't think it usually most of the time goes toward the positive, because there is nothing there. The positives of nature is this kind of unsaid connection. There's this unsaid unity and connection and oneness that you can feel with nature. And, there's obviously some very beautiful and kind things that are out there in nature, but there are also all the negatives. And the human mind probably sees those a little bit more, especially when you are expanding a narrative, because it can create setting and mood. And McCarthy, if we look at like the use of animals in his work, obviously we just talked about the wolf in The Crossing, but, first, in The Orchard, he's been doing this since the start. In The Orchard Keeper, there was a very luminous, or foreshadowing moment with, I think, a hawk and an owl that kind of start off these negative chain of events and have some nice symbology to it. There's actually a good book called Animals in the Fiction of Cormac McCarthy by Wallace Sanborn III that just gets really meta into this. And this guy was actually, I think, just on the Reading McCarthy podcast. And if I just released the McCarthy Underground podcast on Spotify, Apple, a bunch of other places. I have an exclusive, podcast that's not on YouTube on there. If you guys want to go check that out, I haven't officially launched that one yet. I'm going to upload all these YouTube videos, and then, anyway, check that out if you're interested. But let's talk about some psychoanalytic thought really fast. There's a guy out there named Otto Rank, and he was the protege, the secretary of Sigmund Freud, Daddy Freud. And Rank is very unknown, underread, underappreciated, and he took a very different approach with his writing. He wrote a very beautiful book called Art and the Artist, Creative Personality and Development, if I'm remembering that correctly. And he basically argues that the creative urge, that the creative will is actually just a way to deal with trauma. And like that's, obviously every new age art therapy, like do art, I did art and I feel better now, that's obviously not like this mind-blowing thing, but in 1917 or something, this is a little bit more new. And he's helped influence another great book that I think won the Pulitzer Prize called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, where they in both Rank and Becker say that like art, people, their argument would be that Cormac McCarthy is trying to, move through his trauma by trying to immortalize himself in reality forever with, literature. And I'll get into how this relates to tragedy and literature in a second. But if we also want to look at like the Younger Dryas hypothesis that says, I think like 10,000 years ago in 9,800 BCE, that there was massive meteors that caused a bunch of destruction on the earth and onset an ice age. Like obviously there have been cataclysmic events in human history. And when those things happen, if 99% of the earth's population goes down and we lose some civilization and stuff, we have massive trauma that happens to us. And when does trauma end? A lot of very logical types, immediately, leave the room when trauma starts coming up, because, there are a lot of people that overplay the trauma, right? Like as with everything, there are people who don't want to acknowledge that like trauma and even transgenerational trauma exists. Then there's a bunch of people out there who just exploit it, But there's another great book called The Breakdown of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, that talks about how these cataclysmic events And these things created, fragmentation in our consciousness. And that fragmentation needs to be restored. And that's what creates our love of the dark things of pain and creates maybe some of our need for this tragic literature, because that trauma within us creates violence. That is what creates the problems in our society. And it's kind of, states that we maybe weren't as evil or had some of the problems that we maybe used to have. And so when we look at literature, it's basically just a history of traumatized people telling stories. And if we take Wrong's hypothesis that, that art, is a way to heal trauma, and that the people who are doing it are trying to immortalize themselves and deny death and, work through their trauma, then we're getting a lot of our reports of history from, or narratives from these very traumatized individuals. And it's kind of created this reinforcement pattern that we are just traumatized, and tragic literature is the only thing that works. And it seemingly works because we have not solved that yet. 300 million people, I know 300 million people died of democide in the 20th century alone. That is innocent people dying by the hands of government. That's not even soldiers. How much trauma is there when 300 million people die? Innocent people die from government. How much trauma is being created in the poverty in, Africa, South America, and India, and other, countries that are struggling right now? How much trauma and cycles of abuse and problems are just continuing to be perpetuated? So seemingly continuing to write tragic novels is the move, because there will always kind of be an audience there for that. And what are you guys' opinions? Like, can literature heal that? Does literature, so by reading a tragic novel, if I come over here and grab a novel that promotes nonviolence, Blood Meridian, and I read through it, is that going to make me less, what is this? Is this going to help me heal trauma? Or like, can books do this? Like, what is the purpose of literature? Because I feel like literature has helped me work through some of the, more negative aspects of myself. And I read something from Harold Bloom a while back that said, like, reading all the books in the world will not make you a better person, but it will make you more or something. And, it's really like, why are we reading books? Like, why are we reading Cormac McCarthy? Because I know people out there who read because they are narcissists, or they are on a power trip, or they just want to have more knowledge than other people, or have this view of the world, or they're trying to escape from something. And that is very problematic. Being one of the worst decisions of my life was spending a bunch of time in the university system studying English. It was a waste of time, but I saw all these guys and girls, even women, who were reading to have an edge on people, who were reading maybe to get laid, or to be smart, or to, get rich, or, all these different things. They were just reading for that. And it's like, obviously that's very negative. And that's what's weird about Blood Meridian, is that those people love this book. Blood Meridian has fueled, I think, a lot of tragic people's realities more than it's maybe helped. I know so many guys, Blood Meridian, oh my God. And I'm like, well, why do you like the novel? Like, what do you get from this? Like, do you have experiences out in nature? Like, are you growing? And then I look at them, who they are as actual people. I'm like, oh no. I don't know, not to get up on the soapbox right now, but I feel like one of the things I'm trying to do on this channel, and what we should be trying to help, people that we know do in general, I think that books actually can heal. Books can be like a religion, or yoga, or meditation, or, psychoanalysis, and actually heal people, but you have to approach it the right way. You could, you could be a Christian, but you could be Jim Jones. You could be a yogi, but you could be Osho. You could be a reader and be a fuckhead, and so it's like, that's hopefully by, I actually don't know the solution. That's what I'm just trying to do on this channel, is hopefully cater to the right people and shoot down the wrong people. So that is our discussion today on Cormac McCarthy and tragic literature and why he writes it. I'm sure we could have taken this in a million other directions, but we went here. And if you guys want to see some of the influences of The Orchard Keeper, McCarthy's first novel, go check that out right over here. Peace.